Hello everyone, this is Professor Close and I'm just continuing with our first chat looking at the types of tools that we're using in AIS to help us draw out patterns in our data that might give us red flags that we have to look at in terms of the security of our systems and the accuracy of the journalizing and posting in our accounting cycle. So here I'm in Excel. You'll notice that you are being asked to work in Excel and in Tableau. The reason why we do that is, first of all, Tableau is something new to you, but Excel is something that you probably know. So we're using Excel as a bridge to transfer over some of the skills we need in Tableau. Now, I mentioned in earlier postings or conversations that the real issue here is that these two tools have kind of a different orientation, so they become the best in breed of what they do. Excel is a terrific database. It's a terrific way to push numbers and perform calculations. Every intersection, every cell is a field in a database. So its orientation is to do maybe the heavy lifting, right? The initial gathering of the data, the initial sorting and preparation of the data. So that's what we're kind of looking at in Excel. You'll notice as you started to work with Tableau, everything automatically goes to some type of visualization, right? So we have a very similar structure. Tableau should remind you of kind of pivot tables in Excel, in that we have rows and columns at top. We have different ways to filter, sort, to bring in rows, to perform calculations, but it automatically puts it in a visualization. That's the power of Tableau. That's the language that it speaks. It speaks in terms of visualization. And that's what managers want to see today, right? The days of putting columns and rows in front of a supervisor or a user of data, that's gone. They need to see fast, quick and fast and accurate visualizations of data. And that is why business analytics is evolving into the career path that it is. So just a couple tips when I was looking at things. If you're first learning about pivot tables, you're going to, pop up into the label cell up here. You're going to go insert. Now it even tells you what might be an appropriate table, right? So this is a lot easier than it used to be for any of you that might have been working on it years and years and years ago. I like to put things in an existing worksheet, but sometimes they're better presented in a separate worksheet. The other thing is you usually always want to be adding the data to your data model. So that's how we created these tables here, these pivot tables in Excel. We have the beautiful ability now to drop and drag, right? And we can put things into the presentation we want. We have to know something about presenting data though, right? If we have, for example, in this where we have all the charitable organizations, that isn't presented well in columns. You wouldn't want to read that across. So that needs to come down in rows. So having a good understanding of what is easier to digest in terms of the user reading the chart, what's easier to view in terms of presentation is important. And I'll post some resources about that. So first we want to make sure we know what should go in rows and columns. What's the great thing is that we can produce what ifs, right? We can change things, and that will change the presentation of the table, and that will give us an idea if we're heading in the right direction. So that was one thing that I wanted us to just remind us of. Another thing you'll always hear me say is kind of, excuse me for flipping around here, is it's going to do some things automatically for us. We need to be the true authors though. So for example, if you don't like a title or something of that nature, then you can go in and you can make changes. And for me, the easiest way to make changes is to right click. This is sort of how I just work, my way of working quickly. If you've learned with me before, I always say in Excel, there's usually about 3 different ways to do something, and it depends on when you learn the product. So I'm a kind of combination of right click and icons from the menu bar, not so much commands anymore, but people who know Excel commands kind of have an edge because they can also work very quickly. So here I right clicked. I'm going to go to value settings. This area, this value field settings is very important. This is where you can change a name, you can change a calculation, you can also format the data. And when we're first learning pivot tables, we often don't do any of that. So that's something you should start to pay attention to, right? Make this look like you would if you were constructing a table by scratch, right, for a presentation. The other thing too is sometimes you can't change the title, but you don't want to show it. So I'm clicking on row labels here. I go up to pivot table analyze. I hit field edit, and it will take that title away. All right, so that's one way that you can adjust for that. The other thing I usually say about you can remove grand totals is another one. I don't think it's an example in this case, but you can go up and you can remove the grand total. All right, because sometimes you don't actually need that bottom summary line. The other thing we know about Excel is it's very good at producing charts and graphs, right? It can do that. We have to take an extra step to do that. If you were working in Tableau, you'll see that it automatically, that's where it lives. It lives in visualization. It pulls off the Excel database, that's what we did, and then it moved it right into visualization, and then we just had to start to tell the story, right? Start to move forward what's important for the reader to see and push back what isn't important. So one of the things I always say is just because a product can do something, like Excel can put in all sorts of fancy colors, wonderful pictures, fancy letters, all this wonderful stuff, doesn't mean you should use it. So one of the things we're going to continue to talk about through the course is visualization style. The first and foremost rule is your reader should not have to go through any extra steps to figure out what you're trying to display and the story that you're trying to tell. So this one, it's months, so it has a lot of color in it. Some companies may say, no, I need that to be all monochrome shades, right? Or I need it to be shades of gray. Excel can do all of that, just like Tableau. It's only we have to remember to basically take that extra step and insert the table. We can go by recommended charts. Here we'll see that it picks a column chart for the 3 banks and gives us the values. We can then go in through the paintbrush and we can start to adjust for the different titles, the headings, and the format of the numbers. So Excel can do this. We need to be adept at this. Sometimes this is just what you need, right? You're working and you want to see the visualization. Other times you're going to want to produce dashboards, which are more complex. The better tool for that is Tableau. So let's take a pop over and look at some of the Excel work that, the Tableau work that we had to do. So when we came into Tableau, the first thing we had to do was pull the data in from from the raw data, which was a CSV file that it automatically generally opens in Excel. So we just selected the Excel and brought this data in. So in this case, we basically have the tables, right? The different fields from the Excel. Some of them are category fields, others are measurement fields, right? Or calculations. So this should have looked familiar to you, kind of. It's almost like we're in a pivot table view already when we enter Tableau. At least that's how I feel. So, oh, I know about rows. Rows are usually categories. They don't usually involve calculations, but they can. Columns often is going to include a measure, right? We have these things that are called cards, right? So that's where our filters are. That's where other things that we want to do to the visualization appear. When we move things over, right, as easily as sliding them into a row or column, okay, and I'm going to undo that last move. I'm going to move back, okay. These become what we call pills. So you'll see in this direction something like move the pills. And you should see by now that I've actually given you the solutions in your homework, right? Why am I doing this? Well, we're studying this in a virtual environment, right? I don't want you to be spinning your wheels. And, you know, this is good. We're going to get to a point where we'll take off the training wheels, right? So for now, though, don't be afraid to just experiment, right? You have, yes, you have the answer. You probably achieved the answers to the questions in your Excel worksheet. But now we want to try to, through using our resources in the class and through experimentation and practice, learn the visualization tool. The person who's going to succeed in the workplace is the accountant who, when asked, can you get me some data on this, can do it in a short amount of time, right? An hour versus a day, okay? That is the speed at which our data moves now, right? And our business analytics skills need to be up to that. So here in this view, when I was in Tableau, I created worksheets, right, for each of it. Now, I am working in a desktop version, so I have an advantage of being able to save all this in a file. For your learning purposes, because Tableau is not inexpensive, I think a license is like $75 a month or something like that. So you really want to be doing it on a regular basis. You're using what's called the public version, and the public version does not allow you to save. So if you were trying to save your files, you'll see that that option wasn't there, whereas in mine the option is there. So, but you can still work live, right? And you can still accomplish everything that we want to accomplish. Now, right now, I solved for each, and I think some of the things I want to point out here is this automatically goes to visualization. So some of you worked to get charts and a tabular format into Tableau. That isn't actually the tool, right? Or the purpose of the tool. Now, are there times when, yes, we want to put the analytics in there? Yes, there are certainly times we want to put the analytics in there. And we can do that. But in this case, it really is about getting a look at the data in a unique way. We can change, right? We can change different, this isn't pie charts, there's a couple different steps in there, but we can change how things look, right? We can just fool around with it. But what made the most sense? This made the most sense, right? Do we want to see something like what we saw in Excel? I went up and I just clicked this little row and column and row icon, and I could switch back and forth. You're going to see then, what's great about that is you can see really what is a good representation for your data. I wanted to put labels. So remember, this is about dragging the pills. Now, one of the things I had to work on was the idea that I don't drag the pills back down, I drag them again, right? So I put it in my mind is this brings the data in, this formats the data, but I have to tell it what I'm formatting, right? So in this case, if I wanted the bank name again, and I wanted to apply some color to it, right? That's way too much color. So what do? I go in and edit the colors, right? So that I can see what I need to see. So let's revert back, play around, see what's right for you. Labels. So another thing would be here we wanted to see some data labels. We can hover over. If it's a small amount, has a tendency not to put the label there, but we can hover over. What am I looking for labels for? In this, it's for the count, the actual number. So what I did was I pulled that payment into labels so that the labels would appear. So what are some of the other things? The other things, sorting, right? So in some, just like others, we wanted to see highest, we might want to see highest to lowest, right? So we're going to, if you pull something in, so you'll notice in this one, I have the rows colorized. You can see what I applied, right? So here's colorization, and here's text labels, right? In here, you could also create sorting, right? So if I wanted to pull in the bank, right, I can then go in and start to apply conditions for putting that in order. We're going to start to do this in later work. So experiment. Another thing is I'm going through this too, right? This is usually the legend, right? So you can turn the legend on and off. You can hide the card. Later when we get into creating dashboards where we put all our tables on one page to try to have a nice handout or visualization, we may simply be hiding the legends, right? If like this has enough information. We don't need to know that blue is Bank of America or whatnot. But others, you need the legend. So we'll show how to incorporate the legend. The other thing that you might find is you saw a difference between like this, right? Filling the whole canvas, the whole data area versus this view. Excuse me, where was I? Versus this view. This is this button up here, entire view versus standard view. So this is the standard view. If I wanted to emphasize it, I wanted it to be bigger, we would click entire view, or we can also customize it. So don't be afraid to just go in and play around. Another thing, I'll just go to a blank one and maybe put vendor address and vendor name, right? So say I started something and I felt I wanted to undo, right, everything. I had a false start. Up here, just clear the sheet, okay? This icon here is adding a worksheet, right? Although usually you can also add a worksheet down here. So just like you did when you were learning Excel, go in. You can't break it. Play with it, right? If you're struggling to get the answers that you need, we have resources in the classroom, but you can also ask me or ask your fellow classmates. So I think that's what we have for today. I don't want to take up more of your time. We'll go through, remember sorting, right? So if you're in some of these where you want to sort, you're going to be clicking on the amount and applying the sorting, just like you would in the Excel where you're actually pulling the data sort. So we'll go over more of that. So the idea is put what's important up front, push what's not important at the back. Don't have your readers have to think about how they go from one step to another. Oh, here are states, here are amounts. Pretty clear. Which is the most? These states up here, right? All right, that's it for today, and I look forward to chatting again soon.